Hi again! Today I'm going to talk about setting up your bearded dragon's enclosure. So everything that you're going to need from the inside out and even picking out your enclosure. If you need to skip ahead to a section, I'm going to have each section indicated in the description of the video. So you can certainly move ahead or back, or if you need to revisit anything, you absolutely can. Thanks for stopping by. Things to consider when getting an enclosure. Getting front opening versus top. Front is better because then it doesn't look like you're a predator every time you try to get them out of their enclosure. Material enclosure, you can go with PVC, glass, or wood. If you do go with wood, just make sure you're getting wood that is safe for your dragon. I do have a video on toxic wood that I would encourage you to watch if you're considering putting anything wood in your enclosure. You could build your own, but again, just make sure that the materials are safe, including the wood. Multi-level enclosures are not a good idea because your bearded dragon could fall. It also is difficult to have the temperatures be a good temperature gradient. It's hard to get the temperatures just right throughout the enclosure. They might spend more time in one area than the other. Hissy Fit asks, what's the best size enclosure for an adult bearded dragon? The best recommended size is a 4x2x2, also known as a 120 gallon. If you do go bigger, just be sure that you have additional heating to make sure that they have the right temperature gradient in their enclosure. Eclipsier 378 asked when she should upgrade her tank, and is something bigger than a 120 gallon better? You could start out with a 4x2x2. That is the recommended enclosure size. Otherwise, you can start out with a slightly smaller enclosure. 40 gallons would be the bare minimum, and then moving up to a 4x2x2 later. You could go bigger. You absolutely could. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that if you do, you are going to need to have additional lighting to make sure that you have the temperature gradient, because you don't want it to be too cold in the enclosure. You could do a 6x2x2, whatever you would like to do. But just be aware that you will need to adjust things accordingly. When they're fully grown, they'll be about 18 to 24 inches long, and you will want to make sure that they are in the 4x2x2 by then. I kind of look at it as if they can't turn around in their tank, that tank's too small. So having a 4x2x2 ensures that they will be able to turn around. Also, because they grow so fast, take a lot of pictures during that first year because time will fly by, and before you know it, you have an adult beardy. Some substrate options for your bearded dragon include paper towels. They're great for quarantine, by the way. Tile or stones. They're great for filing nails and filing down or rubbing down the pores of male bearded dragons. A reptile mat, not reptile carpet. Not adhesive shelf liner. That's very important. If you get adhesive, it is toxic to bearded dragons. Loose substrate if they're at least 1 year old. You'll want to have organic topsoil and clean play sand. Mix them together about 50-50. Make sure there isn't anything chunky from the organic topsoil. And here's an example of why paper towels are not a great long-term solution for substrate. I like to put tile down to weigh down the paper towels, but if you get a bearded dragon that's really enthusiastic, they'll move them anyway. The first thing we'll talk about when it comes to lighting is heating the enclosure. You're going to need a basking bulb. Make sure that the fixture is the right fixture for the type of bulb that you're using. Otherwise, it could melt, especially if you're using a ceramic heat emitter. Get a dimmer or thermostat for your enclosure. Get a digital thermometer. Do not use analog. They're not accurate in reading the temperature. A temperature gun is also really great because you can measure the different surfaces throughout the enclosure. I highly recommend doing that. UVB lighting is really important for a bearded dragon's health. You need to have a linear UVB. Don't use a coil because the coil won't cover enough of the area of the tank. The linear will cover more area and also will be stronger. You'll also want to give them a multivitamin with calcium. And I do cover that in nutrition information in another video of mine. You'll want to replace the linear UVB every 6 to 12 months, depending on the brand. Depending on the enclosure screen, you may need to mount it inside, which is why I like my enclosure. It barely blocks the UVB. Arcadia has a guide on their website. It's really helpful. You can type in the animal that you're trying to get the bulb for, and it will tell you which bulb is recommended. I use Arcadia because not only do they provide quality UVB, they will last for a year, providing excellent UVB. But you can get UVB detectors to see how good the UVB is for the particular bulb that you're using and when you need to replace it. Now we'll talk about Decor. A quick shopping list for you. 2 hides, 1 for each side, 2 to 3 food dishes. A dig box is optional for enrichment or laying eggs. Tree is optional, great for perching. A hammock, just make sure that it's solid so they don't get their nails caught. A bridge is also nice for perching and watching people and other things outside of their enclosure. November Child 3002 asked, tips for DIY enrichment rather than store-bought? Now, since I do have a video on how to entertain your dragon, I'm going to go ahead and address this based on the enclosure topic. You could make your own hammock, hide, or use branches from the outside. One thing to keep in mind though, and this is really important, if you take anything from the outside, you will need to sanitize it properly. If you want me to do a video on this in the future, I absolutely can. Just drop a comment below, but it's really important to make sure that you're sanitizing it. You should bake anything that you get from the outside so that you don't have anything that might have crawled in there to live come out into your enclosure and bother your dragon or cause them to be sick. So that's really important if you take anything from the outside. And there are safe ways to do it and not so safe ways. So if you want a video, just let me know. And now we're going to go over safety notes. Make sure that you have secure doors and locks on the enclosure so your bearded dragon can't get out. The fixtures should be compatible with the wattage type. So make sure that you're looking at that when you purchase both the fixture and the kind of bulb and wattage type. Test the temperatures using a digital thermometer, not an analog. You can also use a temp gun. I like to do that just to make sure I'm getting accurate readings throughout the enclosure. The inside lights should have covers to protect your dragon from burns. Otherwise, if they happen to bump into it, they could potentially break it, burn themselves. It's just not safe. So if you have to put it inside, make sure you have covers for that. Also, you'll want to use dragon safe products. Use safe cleaners, no toxic wood, no adhesive shelf liner. Those can be damaging to your dragon. Treat wood or anything taken from the outside. You want to make sure that nothing comes in and hurts your dragon or makes them sick. Use escape-proof dishes so that bugs don't escape and then potentially bite your dragon later. And here's an example of a basic enclosure setup. You'll notice that there is a hide on the cool side and a hide on the hot side. The hot side in this picture is on the right. He can also use that as a basking platform. He often will perch on his tree. He has a little bridge in the front so he can get a better look of the outside of his enclosure. You can have the thermometers in different places of the enclosure. Good idea is to have one on the cool side and then one on the top side, either where they typically would be. The basking I like to measure with a temp gun because I can get the exact measurements and it's more accurate as far as the surface that he's touching. And then of course I have some slates that he can walk on, and that helps to file his nails down as well as his pores. So a couple of reasons why I don't go with loose substrate is the risk of them eating it. Bugs could get lost in the substrate. Also, if they ever get sick, if they get parasites or anything, you have to completely empty it out and sterilize the environment. So to me, it's not worth the risk. It's no fault to anyone who wants to do loose substrate. I think having a dig box is a great idea, but to have the entire enclosure loose substrate, that is a personal choice. And I think there are some benefits and also negatives to it. So I will let you decide what you want to do.